You look at Los Angeles public schools, they're a wreck. They're destroyed. And the crime rate. So what is he doing? He's doing nothing. He doesn't talk about crime. He doesn't talk about homeless. He doesn't talk about water. He doesn't talk about fire production. He doesn't talk about gas and oil. He doesn't talk about electricity prices. He doesn't talk about any. All he talks about is illegal immigrants. It's his constituency. And we're going to put them all on Medi-Cal. And then they said, well, Gavin, now we're broke.
Hello and welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. This is our Saturday edition where Victor does something a little bit different in the middle segment. He's going to look at a historical topic, and today is the Korean War. So we'll do that in the middle segment. Otherwise, we'll be looking at current news stories. And so we have Sean Diddy Combs has been acquitted of just about everything except prostitution. And transgendered athletes, Penn has apologized for allowing Leah Thomas to compete against the women and has stripped Leah Thomas of her titles. So those will be the first things we'll look at. Stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Victor is the Martin and Neely Anderson Senior Fellow in Military History and Classics at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. You can find him at his website, victorhanson.com. Please come join us there. The name of the website is The Blade of Perseus, and it has all of Victor's work all the way back to 2004, most of it, I guess I should say. In addition to, you should check out the Victor Davis Hanson fan club on Facebook, and they do a lot of work going back and finding talks that Victor has done or writings that Victor's done, plus the current stuff. So I encourage everybody to join the Victor Davis Hanson fan club, even though it is not affiliated with us. So it's a completely independent entity. So Victor, we have the jury came back on Sean Diddy Combs, acquitted him of everything except for a charge of prostitution. And I must say that one commentator said it was the most expensive prostitution trial in history. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on
he's
that.
not going to see much time. I was kind of curious because the more that the prosecutors brought out the fact that he was a degenerate, and these sexual stories were so shocking, they wanted to emphasize that he was at times homosexual, bisexual, polysexual, that he had large stores of lubricants everywhere, baby oil. They had all of these salacious details, but I kept wanting to hear that he was forcing people. Now, we had that video where he beat up Cassie Ventura, and I don't know what the statute of limitations are. Some states have none on sexual violence, but he was really beating her up, and you thought that would be assault. But when I looked, to the degree that I was interested in it, it was kind of repelling. But when you looked at it, you said, this is a low-rent version, a bastardized version, a vulgar version of Eyes Wide Shut. You know what I mean? Where people go on that Tom Cruise movie and they go and have sex anonymously, and it's kind of perverted. That's what they were doing. And the other thing about it was all of these people felt they were coerced, but they weren't able to demonstrate, given their prior emails and what they had said to other people. If you went there and you felt that you were coerced into a sexual act that was degrading, then you would have had anger and you would have never come back. But in some cases, there was evidence that they returned again and again, and they didn't voice anger at the time. So what's the bottom line? He's a pervert. He's a degenerate. It will hurt his name and career. But it's also a window into Hollywood, because there was a lot of very famous people who went to those parties, freak-off parties, and they knew exactly what they were going. They either wanted to be, I don't know, observers, or they got some thrill out of watching this disgusting activity, or they were participants. But it wasn't like he was this, I don't know what the word would, they got him under racketeering or mobster, and he got all these women that he was buying. When he wanted sexual partners for himself or his girlfriends, he just called up agencies, said, send me over a prostitute. And then maybe he would tell other people, I have a woman for you or something. But I think what I'm trying to get at is the prosecution didn't really have evidence that he was a racketeer or that he was a mobster. So they thought in lieu of that, they could bring in mountains of evidence that he was a pervert, that he was disgusting, that he degraded women. And that was all true. But if you're a pervert who doesn't break a law, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go to jail or be convicted of anything. There's types of perversity that most people listening to this broadcast would say, that's disgusting. And then when we would say, okay, it's disgusting, but where is it illegal? Is a person underage? Is a person being beat up? Is there a transaction of money? Now, that may have got him on that. But he's going to take a hit. Nobody would want to associate with him. The Leonardo DiCaprio type people in Hollywood, they're not going to go over there anymore because they know that the thing about the Fed is they may feel that guy got away with murder. So I don't mean that literally, but we're going to keep monitoring. We're going to monitor his IRS accounts. And they don't want to get anywhere near him. He's toxic. They played, when I tried to follow someone, they played his music. I'd never really heard his music. I didn't like any of it. And he was a record producer. And I just never saw why anybody, he's very homely. He's very obnoxious. He's a bully. I don't understand why he
resonated with people. I don't either. It's a mystery to me as well. Well, let's turn then to the transgendered athlete, and everybody knows that iconic picture of Riley Gaines right next to Leah Thomas. That was actually in the Olympics, having lost to him. And now UPenn has decided, and
Is that the Olympic trials or the Olympics?
Where he actually won was the Olympics.
Yes.
They're not taking that title. They're UPenn is stripping titles in, I guess, whatever conference they're in. They're stripping the titles. So they've apologized, and they are stripping his titles, and a little bit too little, too late, I think. But the education department has been just wonderful in all the things it's doing with Harvard, with UPenn. I think it's amazing. So
the question is, would any of this happen if Kamala Harris, Kamala or is it Kamala? She has both pronunciations. If she had been present, the answer is no. And as I said before, they have so much exposure, these universities, because they run these stealthy, anti-constitutional campuses that are flush with money, and they are flush with all of these supposed intellectual luminaries, and they think they're a law unto themselves, and they do things that are illegal. And they think, we're Cornell, we're Harvard, we're Stanford, you can't touch us. But they have lost. If you look at any poll, they've gone from, when people are asked, do you have a high regard for higher education or the Ivy League, it's gone from about 65 to 35. So the more that they fought, the more that the Trump people had all the cards. Their cards are, well, you're a private. You're like a big Hillsdale. Just don't take any money. We'll leave you alone. And they said, you got this big endowment. Just get that. Whether it was 26%, 27% of Harvard students were from China or the Middle East or other illiberal countries, and that was just a cash cow. They were gouging them. And then they were charging up to 55 to 60% surcharges. They were defying the Supreme Court ruling of 2023. They were using race for admissions, retentions, hiring, and they were lying about it or trying to disguise. I say they, I'm talking about all of them. They're renaming their DEI departments, the Department of Belonging and stuff. And then when you look at the racial theme houses, the racial graduations, the safe spaces by race, as I said before, when you look at the lack of access to face your accuser, the rules of evidence, rules of innocence until proven guilty, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment. Phew. I always go back to that Joe Lonsdale case at Stanford. They didn't give him any political rights. They just said that you're accused and you can't come on campus. There was another, I won't mention his name, but I knew him very well. I know him very well. He was a donor at the Hoover Institution, and he was accused. I don't want to get into it. It's very controversial. But there wasn't a lot of evidence produced, and it wasn't conducted in a manner of a trial, and yet he was not allowed to come back on campus. And it was very unfair. And these campuses are just, they're rules unto their own, they're kingdoms unto their own, and they think that they're so self-righteous and sanctimonious they can do anything. And they butted up against two things. They've lost public opinion, And they can't guarantee, the only thing that used to save them from criticism, they said, if you go to Harvard and you graduate, or you go to Stanford and you graduate, and you're a math major, if you're an English major, you know Shakespeare backwards and forwards. If you're a math major, you're a mathematician basically with a BA. If you're a biology major, you can name every part of a rabbit. And that is not true now. It's DEI, according to Mamdani, violence is a construct, settler colonial study. They don't know any of that. And I can tell you as a classicist, when I look at PhDs, they have each person's thesis printed each year. They don't know anything. I mean, they know something, but so what I'm getting at is these schools cannot deliver on what they were supposed to deliver. And they can't do it because over the last quarter century, they decided to break the law and admit people on the basis of their race or their gender, and not on the basis of their proven expertise as evidenced in grades and test scores. And then we always had that third category, activities. But that was always, you're a Beethoven, but you can't do math. Or you're a Wright brother, or you're Alexander Graham Bell, and you didn't do well in the SAT. But that's not what they were doing. They were doing things like, I was the first in my family to graduate, or from high school, or I went to Uganda and helped build a well, that kind of stuff. So they have a comeuppance, and I don't think they understand. They're still stuck in this idea that George Floyd happened yesterday, and they're immune, and they're on the cutting edge, and they don't understand that if they fight and go mano to mano, toe to toe, teat to teat with the administration, they're going to lose because they have so much exposure. They have so much money. They have so much administrative bloat. And it's all out there. It's a rotten underside of a rock, as I keep saying. And I think that's why they're settling. They want to settle. Gavin Newsom will settle too when he's trying to resist the administration's executive order on female athletes.
Yes, and you have to hand it to Linda McMahon, who is the Secretary of Education, who is supposed to be shutting down the education department, but at the same time, she is taking all of these universities.
It's very funny because the last two, Trump, Betty DeVos, and Linda McMahon, are products of the private enterprise system. They operate big companies, or they've been involved in the operation of big companies. So they have a very different idea about negotiations and what people say versus an academic. So you might think, well, we want a PhD or an EDD in education. No, that's the last person you want. You want some hard-nosed businesswoman or man that understands how to negotiate, and that people lie all the time as they do in business, and that just because you say, I'm Victor Hanson and I received my doctorate from Stanford, that's nothing. And you wouldn't trust that person necessarily. In fact, you would go the other way and say, well, what a pompous person he is, and I'm going to bring him down to size. Everybody says, well, it's anti-intellectualism. No, they're anti-intellectual because they are betraying their own enlightenment. They profess they supported the Enlightenment, and picking somebody or promoting somebody or hiring somebody or admitting somebody on the basis of race is like tribe. It's like tribal politics in the Roman provinces, it's crazy.
Well, I think the other thing about those secretaries of education being business people is they're used to getting things done, and they're not going to just sit around and twiddle their thumbs and do things in the most slow fashion that they possibly can, but rather, and just like Trump himself. So it's great to have that sort of front on the Trump administration that we're business people, and they seem to get a lot more done than anybody else.
Yeah, I think people should realize that what we've been doing in this country is very pre-civilizational. If you read Caesar's Gallic Wars, when he's dealing with the various tribes of Gaul, one of the themes of all of them is that whatever particular your tribe that you belong to, you will never give the same commiserate allegiance to a Roman or a different tribe member as your own tribe. It's like that scene in For Whom the Bell Tolls, when the Spanish resistance is helping Gary Cooper, remember? in the movie version, and he doesn't know how many horses they will have to get away, so he shoots two people. But he didn't need to because they had extra horses. And he said, "It's my village. I take care of my village," meaning I have a tribal idea. And tribalism, it's in the first book of Thucydides. It's a sign of a pre-civilizational idea where you're kind of nomadic, but you judge people on their superficial appearance and their kin ties to you. And so I always relate those two really formative events in my life. When I was about 10 years old, I was at a school, it's called Eric White. It was about 90% Hispanic. And in PE, you choose your team. There was a very poor white guy, and he was a very good athlete. And the Hispanics were all picking the Hispanic. And I thought that was kind of weird. He picked there was about 10 of us white and about, I don't know, 100 Mexican-American kids. But there was a very uncoordinated white guy. And there were 3 people left. And there was a very, very good Spanish Mexican-American athlete. So when we went around and picked. And I said, they're picking all the bad people. They wouldn't pick white people. So I said, don't pick George. Don't pick Leon, please. And he picked George. And I said, we're going to lose. And I was only like 10 years old. And he said, Victor, I said, he can't catch. He can't hit. And why did you? And he said, he's white. And that's all enough. And that was and the other thing is, I think I've told everybody, I was in Libya and I was going from the airport and I just kept thinking, my God, they've got all this oil. It's crazy. And they've got all this wealth. And the road, we had a little Russian car and we hit a pothole and we had to get out. And they made me and my minder, the Russian era minder, 2 of them, we had to help lift the thing out for the taxi driver. So I said to my minder, this Libyan government official who was following me for 10 days, I said, what is it about this place? And he said, Mr. Hanson, we hire our first cousin. Just remember that. And that's
non-meritocratic.
And here we are, the most sophisticated society in the world, and we started going back to tribalism and hiring people by their superficial appearance. You think that we would have learned, and then we decided that, wow, that didn't work, did it? And then we don't apply the same standards to people because of, I don't know what it is. But when you have tribalism and you create that society, then don't be surprised that somebody who's here illegally will burn the flag of the country that he wants to stay in, and he'll wave the flag of the country he does not want to go back to, because that's a tribal affiliation. Or don't be surprised if you go in the LA Coliseum and the United States soccer team is playing the Mexican soccer team, that 3/4 of the stadium is going to be booing the American soccer team. And if you happen to be gay, they're going to be yelling Maniaco and all that stuff, because that's a tribal urge. We should be, all of us, according to our station, should try to stop it.
So, Victor, let's turn to Karen Bass, and she is out there again in the news because she is fighting with the administration, like many of the mayors of cities in Southern California, actually, and has said that I should go home. And Stephen Miller has taken her up and said, but you're an insurrectionist. And so that was the current tweeting back and forth, and she is an insurrectionist. And
she's on the wrong side of the law. So basically her last refuge of such a scoundrel will be the law, but the law is against her. So ultimately, you're saying you are advocating as an elected official that people break the law. And you yourself are breaking the law because you're not enforcing the law to the extent that you are in conflict with federal law. You cannot be in conflict with federal law. You can't have a law that contravenes a federal law. You just can't do it. And yet she's doing it. And the thing about all of these people is, now, Gavin Newsom is suing, as I speak, Fox News because he thinks he was defamed, because he says that he did call Donald Trump, and I don't know what he's into. But then he is saying this is unfair, and he gave a talk about ICE the other day. I don't know if you heard it, about they're going after these people. And they always say they're going after innocent people, but every time they list all the criminals, it's horrific, the people that they're rounding up. So those are the acts of commission, but there's an act of omission. So when you're Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, what are you not doing because you're doing all of these extraneous things? I can tell you what you're not doing. You're not getting the business community and say, we only have less than 4 years to get this city ready for the Olympics. And this downtown is an international disgrace. And we've got to do something. And these freeways need to be cleaned up. And we got to go into LAX and do something, the first place people will see when they come here. Let's go examine all this. They're not doing that. And if you're Gavin, today we had, I say 2 days, yesterday we had the first element of what could be over 60 cents gas hike. I think it was a penny and a half. It's just going to go, they were very smart. They didn't do it at once. It just goes incrementally very quickly. But you want to say to Gavin, we're not going to have any refineries. You've driven them out with all this regulation. The gas is going to go up to $8 a gallon. What are you doing about it, Gavin? Gavin, I just went by the San Luis Reservoir. This was an average rain year. It's 60% full. What are you doing? This water is not just for agriculture. It's for the city of San Jose. It's for the city of Morro Bay. It's for the Cayucas. It's the city of San Luis Obispo. It's for Santa Barbara. It's piped over the mountains in the aqueduct, and it comes out of San Luis. And what are you doing? Why are you letting it go out? You saw what happened, Gavin, with the Snake River. They said, no, you're not going to blow up those dams. Why did you blow up those 4 dams? Why haven't you just said, make a pledge that I'm not going to see all these people slaughtered on the 99, the 101, and the I-5. And I promise you, in the next 2 years, we're going to spend X amount of money. We will have 6 lanes, 6 lanes, 6 lanes, and all our longitudinal arteries through California. Why don't you just do that? Why don't you just say something like, if you're in California and you want to go east, you have 2 choices. You can go all the way up to Sacramento and go on the 80, or you can go around Bakersfield and go out that way. You cannot go in the winter on 3 or 4 routes. But why don't we make one? A scenic highway, 4 lanes, so people can get into the state. It's so backward. And we have all this oil, we have all this natural gas, and yet what is he doing? And the educational system, you look at Los Angeles public schools, they're a wreck. They're destroyed, and the crime rate. So what is he doing? He's doing nothing. He doesn't talk about crime. He doesn't talk about homeless. He doesn't talk about water. He doesn't talk about fire production. He doesn't talk about gas and oil. He doesn't talk about electricity prices. He doesn't talk about all he talks about is illegal immigrants. It's his constituency, and we're going to put them all on Medi-Cal. And then they said, well, Gavin, now we're broke. Well, we can't put them all on Medi-Cal. Gavin, there's rioting in Los Angeles. They're burning stores down. They're looting them. They're occupying the one. No, this is Trump. He caused it. So it's very strange.
All they seem to be doing in California, from just this, not a scientific study, but from my observation, is that they're just scaring the Hispanic population. That's what these
what it is.
Mayors are trying to do, scare the Hispanic population, that somehow ICE has, I guess, so many agents they can just go off after people in the streets. And you have to look at it and go, no way. ICE has very targeted people.
I don't understand that,
they're going after.
I can understand what they're doing. The last election, the Hispanic population was 50-50. 50-50. Hispanic males were 56%. The CBS poll said at the height of this hysteria 3 weeks ago that 56% supported deportations. Okay, 53% of Hispanics do. So I understand that they want to scare them to death and say they're going to be arrested or sent back to Mexico because they need that constituency. But they don't understand, because they don't care about Hispanics or Mexican Americans in general. They don't know what it's like. When you're some wealthy white Karen, or you're some wealthy Bernie bro, or you're someone like Mr. Wealthy Mamdani Faker, and you dream up like Mayorkas or the Biden Sonality family, and you say to yourself, it seems like a great idea just to let let's get up to 10,000 a day. And we saw what happened when they went to Martha's Vineyard. They get a puff coat, and they get a bunch of wealthy white cat ladies that come over and shed tears and say that they're their champions. And then all of a sudden a bus pulls up and says, see you, wouldn't want to be you. So they don't understand that if you're in a Hispanic community Suddenly you got M13, you got Sereno, you got Norteños, you got somebody picking on your kid at school, and your kid's been here 3 generations. He doesn't speak Spanish, but you got a gang member from Oaxaca that wants to beat him up because he thinks he's a gringo, and they're calling Hispanic kids gringos. And 1/4 of the Hispanic population intermarries out of the Hispanic community, mostly white people, so-called white people. So you don't even know who's white or Mexican. But this racist, condescending government dumps people who were here illegally with no background check. And the Hispanic community had a higher than average COVID death toll. So when you had in 2020, 2021, 22, and you were bringing people without audit, without vaccinations, and you were dumping them in the Hispanic community, of course, no one even talked about that they were subject to being infected. And when I was a kid, we had little trailers, and everybody had to get, there was a little cross, the Tuberculosis Society. Remember that? You had to get a chest x-ray. And I remember in first and second grade, we had a couple kids from Mexico that would call, and all of a sudden, everybody in the class had to go down into the nurse and take a TB test, skin test, and then take an x-ray even. So it was like, wow, we're going to check everybody. But they don't care about the Hispanic community. You let 500,000 criminals go into the Hispanic community. Well, where are they going to live? Where are they going to feel most comfortable? They're going to go right into those communities. And then the Democrats did that. And then so what they're going to try to do now is saying Donald Trump is going to pick you up and deport you. If Donald Trump was smart, and he is very smart, and he can control the MAGA base, he could say this. Under Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and George Bush, we let in 20 million people illegally. Under Joe Biden, we let in 12. We have 32 million people. And there are another 20 that came in. We don't know how they came in the past. But we have 55 million people here who are not born in the United States of various legal and illegal status. So we have 16% of the population. What are we going to do? And I propose the following to my Democratic colleagues. All 12,000 are going to go back that Joe Biden let swarm. All 12,000. Those who take my offer of $1,000 and free transit back can come back if they qualify, and they can apply for a green card from Mexico, from Guatemala, from Haiti, from anywhere. If you do not take my offer, we're going to deport you, the 12 million, and you're never coming back. You're going to deport you every time and then you got to get in. Okay, he can do that. And he can find employers that hire. Then he should go back to the reservoir of 20 million plus. And he should say the following. If you have been here 5 years, if you have never committed a crime, if you are not on public assistance, if you're willing to pay a small fine, you can buy a amnesty green card. We don't know what you're going to do later. That's your business. If you want to go through all of the protocols to be a citizen, more power to you. But we will give you amnesty and get a green card after you pay a fine and you show. And you know what's going to happen? Of that 20 million, about 10 million or maybe 8 million who have been working for 5 years. They're productive. They have no criminal record. They're not on public assistance. They probably by now speak perfect English. Their kids, some of them have been born in the United States. They're going to pay a small fine, $1,000, and they will get a green card. And if they wanted, in the dying citizen, I said, tragically, there's not much difference between citizenship and residency. So some of them might not want to be a citizen. But the point is, two things. That will make people say, I support deporting the 12 million. And of the 20 million here, there's going to be people who are able-bodied. I'm not talking about someone who's got diabetes and lost a leg in a wheelchair, deporting them if they haven't committed a crime. I'm talking about able-bodied people who will not go to work and they're on public assistance. And I'm talking about people who have committed a crime. And we'll have a big argument. Well, DUI doesn't matter. You will get about half those people back. And then we get down to about 8 to 10 million illegal aliens. And I think we can offer escalating amnesties, but not citizenship, green cards to those and I know it would work. Every time I go into the supermarket or somewhere like that, and I see somebody who does not speak English and pulls out 6 EBT cards and a WIC card, and they have to hold up the whole line, and they want to see if this one's expired, and they have different names. Or if I go to the bank and I have to wait because of all of the banking irregularity. And I look at the faces of people in front of me and back of me. I'm the only white person. They are outraged at that. They say they're outraged. And when you look at hit and run, when 50% in Fresno County, LA County leave the scene of an accident, who are the victims? Who are the victims? I think 70% of them are Mexican American people that get hit by illegals, and then the person leaves. So how the Democrats have dreamed up this idea that the Hispanic community can be won by terrifying and they're going to be picked up. Barack Obama started it. Remember, he said, well, I don't know about all the rest of you guys, but I oppose, you're just walking down the street and have an ice cream cone. Sure enough, ICE pulls up, put you in the paddy wagon, send you home. That's what he did.
So sad. Well, Victor, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about the Korean War. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. If you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. When's the last time you checked on your home title? That's the legal proof that you own your house. If you're like me, the answer to that is never. The problem is, in today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee with your county, and boom! Your home title has been transferred out of your name. Then they take out loans using your equity or even sell your property. You won't even know it's happening until you get collection or foreclosure notices. That's why you need to stop what you're doing today and find out if you're already a victim. Go to HometitleLock.com/Victor to make sure your title is still in your name. And you'll also get a free title history report, plus a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. That's HometitleLock.com/Victor. And we'd like to thank Home Title Lock for sponsoring the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. You can find Victor on X. His handle is @VD and on Facebook at Hanson's Morning Cup. So if those are your social media outlets, please come join us there. So, Victor, I know everybody's anxious about the Korean War. It's the 5th war in terms of deaths lost.
36,000.
Yeah, somewhere. I was looking for the numbers. That's just boy, you could go down a real rabbit hole trying to find the numbers of deads in any war. It's
they
crazy,
always
but
rise.
Somewhere around 33 to 36.
Yeah, they always rise. They find more than they thought. Well, why did the Korean War break out in June of 1950, just 5 years after the Second World War? There were 3 or 4 precursors. Number one is we had been in the Depression up till 1939. There was 18% unemployment in 39. Maybe higher. That was the second depression. So then the war got us going. After the war, there was this fear that we would have a depression because we'd spent so much. We were up to 125% of GDP. We didn't really understand the Keynesian idea of you prime the economy. So we just disarmed. We destroyed all the B-17. We destroyed B-29s. We got rid of Sherman. We took the 12.5 million and so we were unarmed. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was arming, because it was at the gates of Europe and thought it was going to take over Western Europe because it had East Germany and all of Eastern Europe. And more importantly, it was now in Asia because we had invited them in stupidly during the Potsdam Agreement in July of 1945. So they had split Korea, and we picked the 38th parallel. Stalin came in through Russia, they have a border, and said, oh, well, we're going to help you. And then we said, that's okay. The second thing that happened is there had been the Chinese Revolution. We thought Chiang Kai-shek, we gave him all the money, he had all the cities, and we thought he would win. Mao won because the Soviet Union lavished, and that was from 45 to 49. So all of a sudden, we lost China. Number three, they had a better propaganda. They were saying the following: the Russians and the Chinese. Well, we had an alliance in World War II, and it was Britain, France, United States, China, and Russia. And we were fighting Mussolini in Italy, fascist, Hitler, fascist in Germany, and fascist Japan. And now look what happened. We're still fighting them. But the United States and Britain and France are on the side of Germany. They're on the side of Japan, and they're on the side of Italy. They didn't tell you they were all democracies, but so it was a hard thing to do. And they said, we've stayed pure to our World War II principles. So now we had China and Russia aligned, and they were right on the border of Korea. So they wanted to, the only thing that was holding them back was that we had atomic weapons. In 49, they had the bomb. In June, they decided they had taken a couple 100,000 Koreans, and they had fought with Mao in the Chinese War. They were very veteran, and they invaded, about 250,000 of them. There was just a few Americans in Korea, and they pushed them from the 38th parallel all the way down to the Pusan perimeter, the very tip of South Korea, and everybody said it's over with. And they blamed Dean Acheson, the Secretary of State. Said, Secretary Acheson, when you said on that map that the United States has to keep armed because it has people it protects, Japan, Australia, you didn't mention South Korea. So they thought that you didn't want to defend them. And that was true. It's still hotly debated. So we had this little perimeter, and everybody thought we were going to get out. And they were already celebrating. They had the whole Korean peninsula, and they were talking about on to Japan. So then Harry Truman, of all people, a Democrat, said, well, this is not going to stand. And he sent first a little company of men and then a division, and they almost got wiped out. And they didn't have any anti-tank guns. They had World War II Shermans against T-34 Russian tanks. They didn't have the Pershing tanks. They didn't have the Patton tanks yet. And it looked like we were going to be all through, but they held. Then they brought Douglas MacArthur, who was the proconsul in Tokyo. They always said Douglas MacArthur ran the Korean forces until December 1950, and he never stayed one night in Korea. But he was, in the 70s. So in any case, he decided on a brilliant campaign. Over 100 miles to the north of Seoul, which was under South. Everything in Korea now is North Korean and Chinese. He landed at Incheon, way behind their lines, and cut them off from retreat and basically destroyed the North Korean forces and took Seoul. And so everybody thought the war was over. So then what was going to happen? What do you do? And he says there's no substitute for victory. As long as these people in Korea were going to lose. So he made the decision, basically announced it to Harry Truman and to the Joint Chiefs, we're going to go up north and get rid of these SOBs. And they said, now, wait a minute. We're into October now. This was a September. By the time they took Seoul and they got all ready to go up, it was October. And they said, look at the map of Korea. It goes out like this. It expands. And it gets closer and closer to China and Russia. And it gets really cold up there. It's mountainous. So you're telling me that we're going to send a couple 100,000 UN right to the border, where on one side of the Yalu River there's 1 million Chinese and then there's 1 million Russians, and it's going to be very cold, and we're going to have to disperse our troops because we're going to be occupying forces, so we have to peel off people as we go north. He said, we have complete air superiority. And they said, actually you don't, because the F-80 and the P-51 propeller-driven and World War II, they cannot fight this new plane called a MiG-16. It outperforms all of them. And it was basically expropriated from Germans designed it for the Russians, World War II. So then they said, and there's Russian pilots. They knew that. There are Russian pilots flying these things, and they will shoot down a lumbering 250-mile-an-hour B-29. And so we will not be able to bomb them with air support. And that was all true. So what happened? They invaded in late September. MacArthur said they'll never invade. We'll slaughter them from the air. They were not able to slaughter them from the air because of the deterrent. And they got cold and they got overrun. And they had to retreat, and the longest retreat, 400 miles, in the history of the U.S. military, on two sides. The Marines were on the west the eastern side and the army was on the western. They were evacuated to Pusan. And then what do? You quit because you've lost everything. And so they called in MacArthur and what are you going to do? And he said, I'm not going to, we got to use nuclear weapons. And they said, they have a nuclear weapon. That's crazy. And he said, well, we'll put nuclear waste along the border. Oh. And he said, Truman doesn't know what he's doing. And he started criticizing Truman. So that was when the Uniform Code of Military Justice was enacted that codified all the services and put in Article 88, you shall not disparage the commander-in-chief. So they relieved him of command. And then nobody really wanted to do it. So they thought, well, who was a really good guy in World War II that's still alive? And, well, Matthew Ridgway. Yeah, but his expertise was Panama, Latin America. He speaks Spanish. He's never been in Asia. And he's a paratrooper. And he's been married 3 times. What's this all about? And he had a heart attack right after the war. And they said, yeah, but he'll do it. So they sent him in there in December, and he turned out to be one of those authentic military geniuses. He said, we're going to get hot food, we're going to get warm clothing, we're going to get daily mail for you guys, and we're going to have a series of offensive. We're going to call them Operation Killer and Operation Ripper. And we're going to get as much artillery we're going to get the 120 millimeter, we're going to get 155 millimeter, and guess what? We're coming out pretty soon with an F-86 Saberjet, and they can beat the MiG, especially our pilots. Hang on. And then when we get the B-29s with napalm, fighter escorts, we're going to bomb their supply lines. But he said, this is in the future. We got to go gradually back. So they lost Seoul in March of 1951. And then it started. He got everybody together, and he wore a grenade on one breast, and he wore a kit on the other. They thought it was 2 grenades. It wasn't. It was a mess kit. And they called him Old Iron, T-I-T-S, tits. And he pranced up and down. So much for the heart attack, so much for his age, so much for his marital history. And he just said, did you get warm food today? Have you got a letter yesterday? And anybody who didn't fulfill those orders was fired. And he restored morale. And he said, who are these people? They're a bunch of ragtag. So he said, think about it. We're right next to our harbors, and they're all the way from Russia and China. And now we have air parity, and we're starting to bomb their supply line. These people are hungry, and they're sick, and they're 400 miles from home, and they're sticking their head into a guillotine, and we're the guillotine. So then right after they had withdrawn by intent, and they'd suck them in, and then they unloaded. And when I mean unloaded, in the spring, March, April, they started artillery, and they slaughtered them. They killed over 1 million Chinese and Russians. And then they removed MacArthur from Supreme Command, and he then, who was commander of 8th Army, became the Supreme Commander. And he got Ridgway and his division and Supreme overall ground forces got back to the 38th parallel. Then they found out that they could go a little further. Kansas line, they called it. They were 10 miles north. And then that was the critical question. What do you do in the middle of 1951? Do you do the following? We're going to go all the way and do what MacArthur thought he can do. But this time, we've got the whole UN army, and we're going to have 1 million men, and we're going to have air superiority, and they have lost over 1 million. And we're going to go right up to the edge of Russia and China and make a unified Korea. That's the only solution. Or you say, the American people are already 50% against this war. And they think if we go further north, they're going to turn on us. And they said, well, listen, Ridgway, the Joint Chiefs, General Van Fleet and Lightning Joe Collins, they're all for you. And he said they were for MacArthur, too, when he went and left. And then he got his head in his noose, and they said it was his fault. So what I recommend is we'll negotiate 10 miles back. We'll go back to the 38th parallel, and we'll have a nice South Korea and let them have that. It's all been destroyed. They destroyed North Korea with the B-29s. That was the wealthiest part of Korea under Japan occupation. That's where the hydroelectric plants were, the steel mills. They wiped it out. And he said it's not going to pose a threat for years. So what happened? All of 51, 52, and up till 53 was just a static battle of the Somme, back and forth on the 38th. And then in the election of 52, Ike said, I shall go to Korea. And they said, what do you mean, General, I shall go to Korea? Are you going to end the war? I shall go to Korea. Are you going to use your expertise from World War II as Supreme Theater Command? I shall go to Korea. So he got elected on that. And Truman hated his guts ever since that because he'd say, well, I'm going to go to Korea. And he did go to Korea. And he came back and he said, we're going to negotiate this thing. It's not worth it. 36,000 dead. And so they negotiated. They never got a peace treaty. Today, there's no peace treaty. It's just an armistice. And that's how it ended. But if you look at what Seoul is versus Pyongyang, it's a beautiful, prosperous, strong U.S. ally. And it's under the threat daily of a nuclear power, insane North Korea.
Isn't South Korea our best ally? In fact, it seems to me that that's. I mean, the only other competitor, of course, would be Japan. But even better than Japan, South Korea. They went to war with the United States in Vietnam. Right? So they've participated with them. So I don't know. Are they better than the Japanese?
They're
as far
very
as an
good
ally?
fighters, and we're very close to them. And we used to have a much larger Japanese American population than Korean, but that ended with World War II with new immigrants. And so the Korean population is enormous now. So we have a much greater expatriate Korean American. Remember, they have two new carriers, Japan, and they're called the Kage and the Akagi. So named after their Pearl Harbor precedents. I think Japan still, they're rearming. They're up 2% almost, and they've got sophisticated aircraft. At the end of World War II, we forget that when we had the Hellcat and the P-51, they were making, not very many of them, but they had the Raiden and different new planes with radial engines, and they were as fast as ours. They didn't have very many of them. They had all sorts of sophisticated arms, so they're very capable, and it's good to have them as allies. And
Are you saying that I shouldn't compare them because the Japanese might get mad at us once
no,
again?
I would say the Japanese are. I don't think that South Korea is going to have two carriers quite as soon as Japan has them.
So we'd rather have Japan as our ally.
We'd rather have both of
Definitely.
them.
Yeah, well,
and we
obviously.
also have the Australians, and we also have the Philippines, and we also have Taiwan. And so that's why China hates us, because China, under Democratic administrations, whether Obama or Biden, they call in diplomats or military attaches from South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Philippines, and they say the following. These people are pathetic, these Americans. They talk a great game. They're nothing. They're not going to help you. We fly over your airspace. Do they ever do anything? No. All they want to do is negotiate with us. We're going to have a big surplus with them. We got a bunch of students over there that are stealing all their technology. They can't do a damn thing. Excuse my... That's what they tell them. You're not really... They say you're under the nuclear shield. You think they're going to risk San Francisco, Portland? If we point a nuke at you, they'll back down. And then Trump goes over and very different. They'll say, are we under your nuclear? Yeah, you're under your nuclear shield. But you're going to have to, man up to it. And you're going to have to arm yourself. If you arm yourself, all of us together can overwhelm the Chinese. So don't worry. We're on your side. And it's a different story.
Sure is. Well, Victor, let's go ahead and take a break and come back and talk a little bit about the news and the media's propensity to get things wrong. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. So, Victor, I have a couple of things, and you can comment on any one of them. The first thing is that I recently, and I don't know if people have been reading about it, but they were claiming that the IDF was firing on civilians that were at a food, giveaway, Gazans at a food giveaway. And in the morning papers, a British military analyst, Andrew Fox, just totally dismantled the whole idea that the IDF would be firing on these civilians. And so he proved that this idea that they were was crazy. And so the media got it wrong there.
They were also saying that the United States, because people needed sugar, that they put a big hole and then they put a tarp on it and put a little dirt, and they put sugar on the other side so people would rush and they would all fall in the hole, then they buried them. That was what people in the United States were saying. They're very angry because if you're apparently, if you're a person who's a resident of Gaza and there's food offered by the Americans, it's very orderly. But if you go over to the Hamas people with the UN food, they steal it and they charge you black market prices. So it's very funny about how American students are pro-Hamas, and you get the impression that the people in Gaza privately, not publicly, but privately are sick of Hamas.
Well, that's what the article I was reading this morning about Andrew Fox, they said, and then when we went to interview people, Palestinians that were there, they said they were more afraid of Hamas than they were of anything that the IDF was doing.
Why wouldn't they be? Yeah, absolutely. And yet we have these useful idiots in the United States that keep quoting Hamas casualty figures, and they blew up a hospital. Every time, everything they've said has been proven wrong. It's really weird how our academics who are supposed to be rationalists and believe in the Enlightenment and the inductive method of reasoning just take wholehearted lies and repeat them, professors, students. It's
disturbing. I agree. So let me go on to my next example, right? The medical journal Lancet. It's Britain's premier medical journal. It had an article claiming that 4.5 million children are going to die by 2030 because U.S. aid was cut off. And
are you sure it's not 4 million, 4.5.3321x? It kills me how they make these pseudo exact numbers to act as if they have authenticity.
Yes, and they don't. So a couple of the critiques were they don't even consider that there's a lot of countries out there that can help these children as well. And I thought also they haven't written an article considering how many people have already died because a lot of that U.S. aid went to political purposes and not to help. They should have an article saying that, talking about that.
It's skimmed off a lot of it. A lot of it's used for weapons. A lot of it is used by Democratic left-wing operatives that have, like Stacey Abrams, that type of stuff. And so it's not you don't blame the United States because some thug in Uganda in the Office of Ministry steals money, foreign aid, and then we're supposed to just keep giving it to them. And the other thing is, I suggest that we have the Gates Foundation, but why not the Soros Foundation, the Tides Foundation? The top 100 foundations are all left-wing. Why don't they get together and say, this is the Foundation Aid Consortium, and we're all going to take up the slack from U.S. aid. And because we are so much morally superior and smarter, we can do it a lot more effectively. Why spend it here in the United States? They can do that if they want.
Yeah, they sure can. All right. And then probably a bigger thing for most of us here is that there was just a recent dump of emails from the FBI, and it showed that the FBI had information that the Chinese were creating fake driver's license this is a quote, by the tens of thousands so that they could do mail-in balloting in 2020. And Christopher Wray was the FBI director at the time, and he just buried it. He didn't do any investigation.
I think what's happening right now is we are recalibrating our estimate of Christopher Wray. It used to be that James Comey was such a scoundrel, and this is a guy who leaked classified basically either highly sensitive, confidential, or classified documents that he recorded of a private conversation with the President of the United States. This was the guy who started Operation Crossfire, and he was the one that paid Christopher. He was so bad. He was the representative of this debased FBI. Then we had his replacement, Andrew McCabe, who on 4 occasions lied to federal investigators while under oath. And he was ridiculed and embarrassed, and he is gone. And then we had, I won't even get into Robert Mueller, the first one, because of how he performed during the Mueller investigation and under Congress. He said under oath he didn't know what fusion GPS was or the Steele dossier. That's a lie. That is all, both those terms are all over the Mueller report. He says he's never heard of them. So he was lying or he was senile. And then we had Christopher Wray. We thought he was just kind of a colorless, bureaucratic nonentity in the FBI. And then we learned that well, wait a minute. Under Christopher Wray, they were looking at traditional Catholics and monitoring. Under Christopher Wray, they were going to school board meetings. Under Christopher Wray, they took the Hunter Biden laptop and they kept it under wraps for a year while they knowingly allowed 51 intelligence authorities to lie to the American people and help swing an election by saying it was Russian propaganda. And under Christopher Wray, they knew that the Chinese were pouring money in to help fraudulent voter registration to defeat Donald Trump. The more Donald Trump says that I didn't lose the 2020, it was rigged, and the more you start to hear about things like the FBI not releasing information or really furthering an investigation into China, and the more you hear about how the Democratic Party lawyers basically went to district judges, cherry-picked them, and then changed the balloting so that 70% wouldn't vote on Election Day. The more you hear about Mark Zuckerberg putting $419 million in to absorb the work of registrars in that election in key states, the more you reread Molly Bell's Time magazine article about the conspiracy and cabal and bragging about how big labor and big corporations and the Democratic Party and tech people swung the election, the more that Donald Trump doesn't sound crazy.
Not at all. So, Victor, we're at the end, and we're going to look at a couple of comments from our viewers and readers. This was on your website, and this was from the Can the Left Ever Stop Its Craziness? Stephen Hill said in the movie Horse Feathers, Groucho Marx's song, I'm Against It, was meant to be a satire, so I fail to understand why Democrats have adopted this song as their mode of operation.
There's no rhyme or reason.
No rhyme or reason. I'm just against it. And then Melanie Cummings on the same article said, great article. I hope you recover well from your surgery and we'll be back podcasting soon. As to the Democratic Party, the unmasking gains speed, and with transparency beginning, there is no telling what we are yet to find. And then on your Q&A with Jack on World War II, Charles Carroll writes this. This was really interesting. Talking about the astronauts having the first combat stuff. Don't forget John H. Glenn, the quote, mad Marine. There's a picture of him returning from a mission which shows the most shot up plane I ever saw in a picture. He fought in World War II and Korea. As a side note, I don't forget the Korean wingman Ted Williams, who Jack may remember from baseball.
Yes, I do too.
Williams fought in World War II, but didn't make it.
He lost 2 years of his career.
Anyways, he says, but didn't make it into combat because he was so good at gunnery. The Marine Corps kept him as an instructor. When Korea erupted, the Corps wanted him back, but he said he would only go if he could go into combat. Williams flew 39 missions, half with John Glenn. After he retired from baseball, a sports writer asked him, what was the best team he was on? No hesitation. He said the United States Marine Corps.
Yeah, he was. He was a great pilot.
That's so cool.
He was very heroic.
That's a great 4th of July thing.
He was very heroic. Jimmy Stewart was the same way. He interrupted his career and flew B-17. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening.
Yes, thank you. This is Sami Winc and Victor Davis Hanson, and we're signing off.